Welcome to Local Edition. My name is Brad Pomerance in the Inland Empire today, and we are joined by John McMahon. He is the sheriff for San Bernardino County, and sheriffs, law enforcement have been thrown into the controversy surrounding immigration enforcement. Explain to us the role of local law enforcement in immigration matters as compared to the federal government.
Sure. Local law enforcement, specifically the Sheriff's Department in our county, our only interaction with inmates that potentially are in the country illegally are those that are lawfully booked inside one of our booking facilities or detention centers.
Right. So if an officer, if a deputy goes out and catches a bad guy, is the deputy either required or should he or she inquire about immigration status?
Not required to by any sense, and certainly it doesn't matter. If the person has committed an offense and there's probable cause to make an arrest, regardless of their immigration status, they're booked in our jails.
So that really becomes the source of the controversy, because there are some folks that feel as if, and many of them are in the Trump administration, that law enforcement at any level should engage in immigration enforcement. Local law enforcement, not just in California, but throughout the nation, has expressed concerns about that view. Why are you or others in law enforcement concerned about becoming part of immigration enforcement?
Well, there's the community trust aspect, and I think that's the most important. When we enter into a community and try to investigate crime, and certainly we don't want people not to report crime to us because they're worried about our deputies checking their immigration status. That's the worst thing that could happen in our mind. We want to work with everybody that lives in our community. And the only time that we check their immigration status, or that it's checked period by ICE, is when they're booked inside the jail. And that's done through their fingerprints. Biometrically, we take their fingerprints, they're sent electronically to FBI, ICE, and then we're notified if ICE wants that person by a detainer and a notification request.
And this is where it gets complicated, because so much of how people interact with law enforcement is their perception of whether law enforcement is kind of with them or against them.
Sure.
And law enforcement, over the last 10 years, 15 years, even especially since 9/11, has had pretty strong relations. I mean, there have been some bumps with regard to recent incidents in other cities. But now, at least in some communities of color, there's a fear. Even though you may say, we're not involved in immigration enforcement, that you are. And so either anecdotally or even through studies we've seen that folks of color may not be as willing to interact with law enforcement. They may not even report crimes.
Right, and that's the worst thing that could happen, because there's true victims out there, regardless of their immigration status. And we encourage them to report crimes and interact with our officers. And as soon as we start, if we were ever to do that, immigration enforcement at the street level, all that trust would be eroded. In addition, that's not frontline law enforcement's responsibility.
But I gotta say, I mean, I've heard you say that. I've heard folks from all levels of the political spectrum, left, right, and center, folks in law enforcement with different perspectives. And yet our friends in the federal government don't seem to see it that way. I mean, they seem to be very firm that either you are supporting our efforts to decrease the number of undocumented in our country, or you're not. And if you're not, we're going to start pulling your funds, your federal funds.
That's a concern to all of us in law enforcement. And as I mentioned, we do cooperate with ICE once an individual is booked inside of our facility. We'll notify ICE when that individual is being ready to be released so that ICE can take custody of them. And I think that's the appropriate way to do it.
But you know much better than I that that's not how many in the federal government perceive it. I mean, what we know is there is a decision out of Oregon which says that local law enforcement cannot hold someone beyond their sentence if ICE asks. Now, presumably, if someone has had a 20-year sentence for armed robbery, you can let ICE know they're about to be released, and they can get there before their release date, correct?
Correct,
So
absolutely.
when is this issue coming up where ICE feels as if, well, you're not holding them long enough?
Right. And that comes down to the notification component.
Okay.
When we send an inmate to court, for example, and if the judge decides that that inmate is going to be OR'd or released for whatever
released
reason.
on their own recognizance.
Correct. Or for whatever reason the judge releases them from custody, they come back to the jail, and within a matter of a couple of hours, we have to release them. We'll notify ICE that that inmate is going to be released in the next couple of hours, and let them know that's going to happen, and it's their responsibility then to get to the jail and pick that inmate up.
So how is it your fault? You know, why is local law enforcement being targeted as being uncooperative with the federal government? Look, the federal court decision couldn't have been clearer.
Right.
What are you supposed to do?
Right. And what we've told our staff is to continue to notify ICE, just as we say in our policy, and stay in line with the law. And unless the federal government changes their process, either through some type of judicial review, probable cause declaration, or a warrant, I cannot hold them past their county release time. That decision stands in Oregon, and it will impact everybody across the entire country.
So I'm wondering, I mean, does the National League of Sheriffs, I don't know if that exists, but need to, scream from the rooftops, look, federal government, we're not being uncooperative. We're just following the law. You want to change the law? Amen. Give it a shot,
right,
and we'll follow the law. Because look, when you look at kind of the public discourse, I think folks feel as if that maybe law enforcement isn't playing. I mean, there is a view. Look, the Trump administration can be, has its challenges with public opinion, but on this, there is a sense if you're undocumented out, and you're not playing.
Yeah, from the sheriff's perspective, it's pretty clear. We're all on the same page. I'm a member of the Major County Sheriff's Association as well as the State Sheriff's Association here in California. We've all been saying the same exact thing. I had the opportunity to meet with the acting director of ICE as well as the now Attorney General. And
Mr. Sessions.
Yes. Myself and several other sheriffs explained.
And what does he say? What do they say?
They understand what our dilemma is and that we're complying with the court decision out of Oregon. But at this point, there is no mechanism for them to get judicial review that would allow us then to hold them past their county
It's just
release.
frustrating. I mean, look, I'm just an average guy trying to follow the situation. And I mean, they really are speaking strongly in terms of, we're going to withhold your federal funds if you don't play. But you can't play. I mean, how do you play?
Well, that's right. And if we hold them past their county release time, guaranteed we'll get sued and guaranteed we'll lose.
And lose. So you're getting hit on both ends. You're going to lose a judgment,
That's right,
and you're going to have your federal funds withheld. That being said, the state of California is fighting the Trump administration pretty hard on this.
Oh, yes.
And they've talked about kind of state sanctuary status. I don't know what that means. I don't think most people know what it means.
Right.
What's your take on it? I know some sheriffs have come out and expressed concerns about that potential legislation.
Well, yeah, and I'm opposed to Senate Bill 54, and that, in essence, would prevent sheriffs or law enforcement from communicating with ICE as to...
At all?
Correct. If we had an inmate in our custody and ICE wanted them, it would prevent me from calling ICE and telling them when I'm ready to release that inmate.
Even if it's the inmates, it's the end of the 20 years and...
Right. ICE would have to find out on their own. And here's the problem with that. ICE knows that that inmate is in my custody or the state's custody or whoever might have custody of that inmate. They know. And when I release that inmate, if they don't pick them up or if we don't call them to pick them up, that inmate is going to go back into the community. ICE does not forget about them. ICE will go into the community and look for that individual. And they'll go house to house looking for them.
And that causes its own.
It does.
He is
it does.
San Bernardino Sheriff John McMahon. I'm Brad Pomerance. It's Local Edition.